The second period of the Diaz government comprises from 1888 and 1890 and ends in 1908. It was characterized by total centralism and a more personalist and authoritarian attitude on Diaz's part and the governors of the states. The change, of course, was due because many of his original supporters died, and three new figures performed an important role that created a conflict that eventually caused the fracture of the Porfirian elite. Baranda was a liberal with a significant influence in the South, in Campeche, Tabasco, Yucatan, and Veracruz. Limantour was a so-called scientist belonging to a group of outstanding professionals and wealthy families, founders of the Liberal Union, defenders of government institutions and worker unions. And Bernardo Reyes belonged to the classic Porfiristas. He had a strong influence in the north and the army on his side. During some years, Diaz was able to mediate between the three different groups, but the rupture was inevitable when he had to elect his successor. In 1898, he chose Limantour and believed that Baranda and Reyes would accept his decision, which they did not. For 2 more years, the president took advantage of what the different groups offered him, trying to maintain balance. However, the elite fractured, and the president could not conciliate opinions nor unite forces. Once he chose the scientists, he left aside the liberals and antagonized the army. He lost influence with certain groups and regions, no longer in the political game. The system was paralyzed. Positions had been negotiated and distributed. The agreements with governors or regional powers forced the president to ignore his commitments with the farmers. His agreements with investors and business people made him overlook the union workers. All this caused him to become authoritarian and use repression to rule the country. In this second period, it is evident, even though not new, the violation of the autonomy of the legislative and judicial powers. The president gave these positions to his relatives and friends, and they were elected over and over. They would only lose their status if they antagonized their benefactor, so they owed him loyalty and had no autonomy. The governors also lost their independence. Governors and municipal mayors depended on the president, and parallel to centralism, control and repression became stronger. In the midst of all this, the Mexican Liberal Party appeared. They had a voice in the press. Other newspapers were not official. They were Catholic and union workers and had one thing in common. They would criticize Diaz politics. Every day there were more social protests, and repression was the response. Discontent took various forms: attacks on public buildings, street demonstrations, lootings, worker strikes. During this period, Diaz deported hundreds of men, women, and children Yaquis to force work camps in Oaxaca and Yucatan. The famous killing of the miners in Cananea and Rio Blanco happened at this time. With this situation, Diaz reoriented his effort to foreign relationships. He had been very cautious with the United States because of their threat of territorial expansion. Then he would say his famous words, "Poor Mexico, so far away from God and so close by to the United States. The United States had a more substantial influence in the Caribbean and Central America, so he cultivated diplomatic relationships with England, France, and Japan to avoid their interference. He opposed the United States to become the guardian of Latin American countries, saying that each country had the right to rule itself. Many factors propitiated the downfall of the Porfirio Diaz regime. More than just one crisis, many crises started in the first years of the new century, which affected economical, social, and cultural areas and influenced the political scenario. The regime was old. Porfirio Diaz was 80 years old, and the median age of the politicians was 60 to 65. Diaz was not the only one to have remained so many years in power. It was the same practice for the state governors, who would usually stay up to 17 to 18 years in their positions. The division between the scientists and the other factions still paralyzed the system, and he had lost power to conciliate. At the same time, they did not allow new political sectors to participate in the government. In 1908, Diaz accepted to be interviewed by an American journalist named James Creelman. He declared that he would not contend in the polls for the next electoral contest. Instead, he would allow it to happen in complete freedom because he considered that Mexico was prepared for democracy. That statement shook public opinion, but it was only a statement for the world press. Diaz was not planning to resign. After that, however, the opposition radicalized. The liberals led by Madero were different. They were in favor of legality and followed the Constitution, respected vote, were against re-election, and favored farmers and workers. Despite all this, elections took place according to tradition, and Diaz proclaimed himself the winner. 6 months later, revolution broke out. And a few months later, Porfirio Diaz was forced to abandon the presidency and the country, taking a ship to France. This was the end of the Porfiriato. This period was crucial for the consolidation of a state-nation. Diaz did not comply with the programs nor its challenges. He resorted to force. He never followed legality or respected electoral laws. He violated individual guarantees, but he achieved a specific order. He helped political and regional forces consolidate. He succeeded in applying the liberal project. He created an economic project. He united the country and gave it a national identity. And above all, he defended sovereignty. Loving Mexico thanks you for being with us today. Be sure to subscribe and leave a comment. Continue watching our videos and enjoy Loving Mexico.